In 2007, I first came in contact with Bethesda Game Studios and their acclaimed Elder Scrolls Oblivion. I fondly remember camping out at Best Buy to pick up my launch day PlayStation 3, and Oblivion, I think, was my first game to stretch my console's legs. And sure enough, come 2008, Fallout 3 launched, and I finally got to put my first big boy PC to the test. If you've watched some of my content, you've probably seen my Pip-Boy in many videos here on the channel, so it's safe to say that I am a fan of Bethesda's games. Starfield has been on my radar for a long time now, and I'm just as hyped to fly around the stars as I was to stroll across the plains of Oblivion. Coming out of the Starfield Direct, though, Todd Howard dropped a bit of a bombshell for us gamers. The game is designed to run at 4K and 30 FPS on console. Now, I'm a proud card-carrying member of the PC Master Race, but I'm equally concerned for my brothers on the console. So in today's video, let's figure out if their target resolution and frame rate are acceptable by today's standards and how that will translate into actual gameplay. Hey guys, Turk here. I hope you're having a good one. I've gone on the record claiming that 30 FPS gaming is dead, and that video saw mediocre success at best. However, I do acknowledge that in some instances, 30 FPS is necessary. In some console generations, graphical demands are so extreme that 30 FPS is essential to see the gaming medium continue to evolve. Along with that, it's easier to digest and immerse yourself in a cinematic 30 FPS game. But in the age of the PS5 and Xbox Series X, shouldn't we have enough power on a console to play this game at a fluid 60 FPS? According to Digital Foundry, Starfield looks to target an internal resolution of around 1296p. That's a bit below 1440, but at least a lot higher than 1080p. Of course, Bethesda is partnering with AMD, and that means they are using FSR to upscale the game to a 4K display on the Series X. There's been a lot of drama concerning that partnership and how locking out DLSS is just bad for gamers, but I just don't got time to get into that right now. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, let me know down in the comments. Regardless of how you feel about that, with 4K resolutions, FSR2 works really well, all the way down to internal resolutions of 1080p. I've covered upscaling in extensive detail several times here on the channel. I've also done something that no one else has done: objectively confirm how good FSR is compared to DLSS using Netflix's VMAF tool. If you want to check that video, definitely click the card at the top right. Now that we know how the game intends to reach its targets, you might be telling yourself, wow, that's a really low resolution to only hit 30 FPS. But is it though? Let's look at some games. First up is Plague Tale Requiem. When the game first launched, it aimed for 4K resolution at 30 FPS, and when the game needs it, it will dynamically reduce the resolution down to 1440p. That's what we call DRS. It's easy to hit that on my RX 6700 XT most of the time, and I'm typically running in the low 60 FPS range. However, there are times in the game when even 1440p isn't enough, and we dip below 30 FPS. In this alley scene, we see noticeable drops into the mid-20s, while still being 100% GPU bound. So clearly, there is a desire to reduce resolutions below 1440p while barely maintaining a stable 30 FPS. A slow cinematic game like Plague Tale is one thing, but what does resolution scaling look like in a 60 FPS game? Enter another fellow ZeniMax Media studio, id Software, with their latest release of Doom Eternal. This game is heavily optimized and runs extremely well on a plethora of hardware. For the PlayStation 5 and Xbox, there are a few different gaming modes. Performance mode aims for a 120 FPS experience. Balance mode hits a steady 4K 60 FPS experience with no dynamic resolution scaling, and RT mode also shoots for 60, but they do engage DRS to keep it there. Again, the 6700 XT does exceptionally well in those first two game modes, but let's look a little closer at RT mode in action. Here, I've got the game set to 1728p, and DRS is targeting 60 FPS. We have our in-game performance metrics in the top right, and I want to highlight one critical line. We have the current output resolution below the processor, and in parentheses, we have the resolution scale. Typically, we see a value of 100% on the screen, but occasionally that number can drop as low as 50%. When you do the math, that's an abysmal 1536 by 864p, far below our target with Starfield. What's important here though is that even with an aggressive scale resolution factor, the game still can't maintain a locked 60 FPS, with 1% lows triggering into the low 50s and sometimes even in the 40s. Thankfully, it isn't easy to see in the heat of the action. Still, technically, even a heavily optimized game can struggle to hit its performance targets. So scaling resolution down to maintain our target frame rate makes a lot of sense when we have a significant GPU load. Though I admit it's not ideal, achieving a consistent frame rate is critical to both developers and gamers. But the GPU isn't the only thing that can drag your frame rate down. Let's take a look at the CPU. The test system that I'm using to capture all of this footage today is my rendition of an Xbox Series X. It uses a Ryzen 7 3700X with SMT disabled and a static clock speed of around 3.6 GHz. I've also found in my testing that the 6700 XT tends to be a bit faster than a Series X console, and to me, it works well as a standard for modern gaming. The first game that screams to me as a CPU bottleneck is Cyberpunk 2077. Back in 2020, the hype was real, and I'm constantly coming back with additional hardware to ask the question, can it run Cyberpunk? In this Xbox Series X configuration, we're trying to see if our CPU is up to the task. Loading up an early save as we exit V's apartment, walking the streets of Night City stresses the console's performance targets. In performance mode, the game aims to run a dynamic resolution down to 1440p while maintaining a locked 60 FPS. And during our walk, we are comfortably at that threshold. But look a little closer at the performance metrics. At the top left of the screen, we have our GPU and CPU utilizations, with our GPU hovering around the mid to upper 90s. Crossing the street shows us dipping into the 70s and even into the 60% utilization on the GPU. That, my friends, is what we call a textbook CPU bottleneck. Fortunately for Cyberpunk, performance is still good enough to pass the threshold. And looking at the Xbox Series X, that console can easily hit this limit. But to add salt to the wound, as we drive around town, we regularly see the GPU utilization dip, while frame rates do remain reasonable. What that means for Starfield is even if we can maintain a decent resolution and GPU load, there will surely be instances where the CPU is the weakest link, forcing the system to reduce frame rate accordingly. Case in point, Elden Ring, another excellent game with a frame rate cap of 60 FPS. From Software leans heavily into strong CPU performance to keep our characters moving. As we ride our steed across the intro area, we hit a comfortable near 60 FPS throughout the forest. But all bets are off once we stroll through the encampment with the wandering NPCs. GPU utilization tanks below 70%, and our average frame rate suffers accordingly. And take a look at that, our 1% low is in the low 40s. What's worse here though, is we need a stable frame rate in times like this. Bouncing around can translate into a life or death situation. But imagine if you set a frame cap of 30 FPS. Though we're still at 1440p here, our experience calibrates to that 30 FPS experience, and the game just feels far less jarring. Sure, it's not as fluid and ideal as we would like, but the consistency can be forgiving in this punishing console configuration. So let's bring it all back to Starfield. How do these mechanisms translate to Bethesda's upcoming release? As I said at the beginning of the video, 30 FPS does have its purpose, and from what it sounds like, Starfield will be pushing the limit regarding graphics, physics, and simulation. Judging by the Digital Foundry analysis, the game design favors a more cinematic experience, not a high-octane shooter. But how can we justify 30 FPS? We need only look at another Creation Engine game, Fallout 4. On PC, Fallout 4 aims for 60 FPS, and with our Series X build, we can easily hit that design target, even maxed out at 4K. However, the name of the game here is consistency, so let's run a quick side-by-side. As we fly to the Pridwin, it appears that 60 FPS is a lock on our Xbox Series X build. But as soon as we fly out to the outskirts of town, yikes! Even our potent PC struggles to maintain 40 FPS. These are very similar types of scenes that we have seen from some of the Starfield gameplay reveals. Now let's swap over to 30 FPS. And would you look at that? Same spot, same scenario, and it's a stable experience. As we see with Elden Ring, though the performance isn't ideal, our brains will equalize to the gameplay, which becomes a good experience. But how does this handle in a gunfight? At 30 FPS, fighting the super mutants and even an unexpected attack from some raiders outside is just a walk down memory lane. With explosions and some occasional VATs, the gameplay feels fluid, even with my 60 FPS calibrated eyes. In another scene, I went on a scenic stroll north towards a bunker, and of course, I encountered a pack of ghouls. As I lay down the law with my pipe rifle, 30 FPS doesn't really seem all that bad. And judging by the Starfield Direct gameplay, this kind of performance feels very similar. Now, there are claims that the gameplay drops to about 21 FPS, which is entirely possible. You might call it a bit of cope, but there could be numerous reasons that it dips to 20 FPS right there. The game could be hitting CPU bottlenecks like with Elden Ring. It also could be bottoming out on their resolution scaling, and they just could be using an earlier build of the game. Take your pick. Despite that one clip, most of the gameplay footage we see feels pretty good, and it's comparable to our 30 FPS Fallout 4 footage we have right here. Todd Howard has set the baseline, 4K at 30 FPS. Digital Foundry has counted the pixels, and we're expecting it to be comparable to 4K with FSR2 in balanced mode. I'd love to hit 60 FPS on a console, but this target is the baseline, and we need to judge the game on that. If Starfield can maintain a 100% locked 30 FPS experience, I think that most gamers and reviewers will still enjoy the game while complaining that they wish it were faster. But if Starfield can't maintain that target threshold, flame away, my friends. With such a low performance target, anything less than that deserves the scrutiny, especially given our current state of gaming releases with Final Fantasy XVI, Gotham Knights, take your pick. Given the targets, I hope that this video helps highlight how developers can continue to push their game's graphical limit while maintaining a nearly acceptable performance level. I look forward to flying around the stars with my kids in my lap and adding this game to my long list of gaming moments.